Our next storyteller, Pearl Steinberg, has always loved stories, which is kind of like a stupid sort of thing to say, right? She wouldn't be here if she didn't like stories. Her father, she says, was an incredible storyteller. He always told stories, tucking her and her brothers into bed at night. And when he was off on what seemed like frequent business trips, it was Pearl's job to tell the stories to her brothers. Then she told stories to her children. And she must have done a really good job telling stories to her brothers, because then she got to tell stories to her nieces and her nephews. And she must have done a good job telling stories to her children, because then she got to tell stories to her grandchildren. Earlier this winter, Pearl was supposed to be in one of our performances, and she had this incredible story, which I and a few others got to hear as part of that group's rehearsal. And then 2 days before the performance, Pearl got sick and couldn't be in the performance. And one of those people came to me that night and said, you know, Pearl's story is so great, we've got to find some other chance for her to tell it this year. I'm the president of the Broadway Story Council. I get to pick tellers at Festival of Stories. So, here's Pearl Steinberg with 19 Torahs.
My husband and I love to use our vacation time to travel to foreign countries and learn about their history. And in the year of 1999, we decided to take a course that was offered by Elder Hostel called Discovering Scotland. And I thought, do you know, that sounds interesting. I was always interested in hearing about the Vikings, and my husband loved herring. And he had heard that in Norway they had an abundance and a variety of that delicacy that was not known anywhere else. Well, we send in our deposit, and my husband made arrangements to set aside the 3 weeks that the course was going to take place, and he would not be in his office at that time. And we were all set. To our dismay, 2 weeks before we were to leave for Oslo, we got a note from Elder Hostel informing us that the program had been canceled. It seems that they didn't have sufficient registration. Well, we were really disappointed, but they assured us that they would either give us a refund or that we could apply the deposit to some other course. Well, we had already set aside 3 weeks. So we looked in their catalog for some other course that had the same time frame and was overseas, because that's what we wanted to do. And we came across a course that was titled Jewish Heritage in Iberia. Well, not as swashbuckling as Vikings, but we had never been to Spain or to Portugal, and we thought, well, this would be a good opportunity. So we signed up, and 2 weeks later, we were on our way to Lisbon instead of Oslo. And when we arrived at the airport, we were met by the Elder Hostel guide and some other hostlers who had arrived within the same frame time from other areas of the country. And we went on a bus, got to our hotel, and after we registered, we were told that in an hour and a half, there would be a meeting, an orientation meeting, and our first lecture. Well, we just had time to get a small breakfast and to wash our faces and get down to the meeting. And there we met the other hostlers who had been there for a while. And I remember thinking that as far as I could remember as an American, the year 1492 was very important because that was the year that Queen Isabella of Spain had outfitted Christopher Columbus in order for him to be able to do some exploration. And of course, it ended up with the discovery of the Americas. And as a Jew, I realized that 1492 was also the year that Isabella declared that Spain was a Catholic country. And anyone of another religion had to either convert or leave, or they had no other option, they would be executed. Well, of course, at this time, a lot of Jews did leave. Some did convert. There were others who converted, but in secret still practiced their own religion. But I didn't know about Portugal until this lecture. And there I learned that in 1496, the King of Portugal decided that he would like to marry one of the Spanish princesses. And Queen Isabella gave her consent, but only on condition that Portugal accept Catholicism as their official religion. And so, in 1496, all of the people who were not Catholic had to either leave, convert, the same story as in Spain. And it wasn't until the 18th century that Jews began to come back to Portugal. And these were mainly businessmen, and mainly from Morocco. And after a while, they found that they really needed to build a synagogue, because up until now, they were meeting in different people's homes in order to conduct their services and their prayers. But since more and more Jews were coming, it was really not working out too well. And finally, in 1904, they dedicated the Synagogue of Lisbon. And we heard that later in that day, we were going to take our first excursion to that house of worship. And sure enough, that afternoon, we all got on a bus and took a short ride to this beautiful courtyard in which the entry to the temple was available. It was a very interesting structure, simple, Romanesque, but elegant. Since this was an Orthodox temple, when we came inside, the women were directed to one area to sit, and the men were conducted to another area. And then the president of the congregation, a woman named Esther, told us something about the history of the temple and about the Jewish life in Portugal at this time. One of the men in our group asked if we could look inside of the ark. Every Jewish temple, every synagogue has a cabinet that's called an ark in which the Torah is stored. For those of you who don't know what a Torah is, let me just give you a brief explanation. The Torah is the Old Testament written on pieces of cloth that are sewn together and form a very big scroll. Each end of the scroll is fastened to a wooden pole. this parchment in handwriting is inscribed the whole of the Old Testament. And it is inscribed by a trained person who is trained just in this type of thing, with using a quill and special ink. The whole process takes almost a year to complete. And most temples have one Torah in the ark. Some have two. Occasionally, in a very wealthy community, you may have a third Torah. Anyway, when this man asked if we could see inside the ark, Esther said, "As a woman, I cannot open the ark, but I can give you the key, and you can open it." Well, he eagerly accepted, and he took the key, and he went to the ark, and he unlocked it and opened it. And then we saw him peering inside, and he seemed to be counting. And he turned around with a puzzled look on his face. He said, "There are 19 Torahs in this ark. I don't understand." And Esther said, "Well, let me explain. During the Second World War, when the Nazis were trampling east, marching east, when they came across a Jewish village in Hungary, Lithuania, or Poland, they rounded up the Jews, sent them to concentration camps, and burnt down the synagogue. In some of these villages, the rabbis, who sometimes got advance word that the Nazis were on their way, sent the Torah to Lisbon for safekeeping." I suddenly got a chill down my spine. It was more than 50 years since the peace treaty had been signed. The war was over, and there was still 19 Torahs in the ark. I wondered if there would ever again be a Jewish village in these places in Poland, Lithuania, and Hungary. And if there were, if they would build a synagogue and know that in Lisbon there was a Torah that was waiting for them to call it. Well, even though this